Hey, what's going on, cash flow hackers? It is Chris with Life 180, and for this video, we are here talking about the fact that the government is lying to us. It's really kind of out of control what's going on right now. I've been doing a lot of research. I'm kind of obsessed with this economy stuff. I've been doing this for a long time. I used to, even before I got into the financial industry, I used to write a blog on the economy, kind of like the history of money and economics and government stuff, going back to the institution of the Federal Reserve. And if you haven't ever read the book, The Creatures from Jekyll Island, it's absolutely something everybody should read. But that's another conversation. The reason I'm doing this video today is because of the fact that the government's lying to us. It's pretty scary. I've done a lot of videos talking about since the 70s, the early 80s, late 70s, the fact that we've been living in this kind of environment where we've been reducing interest rates, right? Like, so from 1980 to 2009, interest rates were just kind of like this slow, steady decline from like 20% to zero. And then when we bottomed out at the financial crisis in 08, 09, we started quantitative easing. So they couldn't reduce interest rates anymore to relieve pressure off the economy, right? They couldn't do that. So what did they do? They started printing money and do quantitative easing 1, 2, 3. And so we've led to this situation where money is getting printed. Like 30% of the money that's ever been printed in circulation in the United States has been printed since the end of 2019, right? So this is going on, and there's a lot of the pundits out there that will tell you that there's no inflation. Inflation isn't happening. These are not the droids you're looking for, right? Like there's nothing to see here, right? And so while I've been saying that for a long time, I should say, that we've been in a cycle that's very similar to the 70s, right? I've been saying that this is happening, and that if you look back to the 70s, you can compare what's going on now to the 70s, and even look at the headlines and the news articles and the magazines and all these things, and it's very similar. The reality is right now, it's actually way worse than it was in the 70s. Because I'm going to go through some stuff. I've been listening to a lot of economists and podcasts, and I've been reading a lot of stuff and doing a lot of research, going through the CPI numbers, reading the BLS reports and the Fed meetings and all this stuff. And the reason I say that it's worse now than it was in the 70s is because the reality is we're not even using the same calculation, the same equation to calculate the CPI formula that we were in the 70s, right? So think about this. So the government right now is manipulating you to think that it's not as bad now as it was back then. Because look, back in the 70s, inflation got up to 13.5%. It was crazy. We had to get out of control. It was getting out of control. We had to do something. But here's the bottom line. If you were to use the same formula for inflation today that they used in the 70s to calculate CPI, it's going to be much worse. It would be much worse today than it was in the worst year in the 70s. So I was listening actually to a guy, and a lot of you probably know him. His name is Peter Schiff. He's a great economist, runs a great podcast. And he was saying that right now, according to the 70s calculation, we'd be roughly at about 15% inflation for this year, right? So I think this is the craziest part of what's going on in the CPI and in the formulation and how it's changed, right? So the calculation right now basically takes out the impact that housing prices and rent have on the CPI. So this is kind of how it works. Back in the 70s and 80s, actually, up into the early 90s, house prices and rent were a big portion of the CPI, which if we think about it, it makes sense because those are two things that people spend a lot of money on, right? Like those are two areas of the economy that every single person that's producing in this world effectively has to spend money on. So that's it would seem common sense that that's in the calculation, right? What's nuts is the fact that they actually removed housing and rent from the CPI altogether. I mean, not altogether, but effectively they've removed it and they replaced it with something called owner's equivalent rent, which basically isn't even a calculation. It's done by a survey, which is totally absurd, right? Like it's crazy. What they do is they call people up, they call homeowners and say, hey, if you were to rent your house out, what do you think you get for it? Nobody knows that. People don't know that. So if you think about it this year, home prices are up 20% this year. Rent is up about 20% this year. So what the owner's equivalent rent, what they're talking to people about right now, was 3.5%, right? That's what it's going up right now. So if you were to account the increase for real rent and real home prices and real estate inflation alone, and move out the 3.5% that they're giving it credit for, and actually put in the same weighting on the CPI like it was in the 70s, we'd be at about 15% right now. So think about it this way. The CPI is supposed to measure the cost of maintaining a certain standard of living. It's that simple. If you manipulate housing, food, energy, healthcare, and other items that were more weighted back in the 70s and 80s, it doesn't give you a clear picture of what's really going on, right? Like this is the problem. They've manipulated it to make it not look so bad. So people have this false sense of security, and we wonder why life gets harder and harder and harder. It's because inflation is way worse than they're telling you. And so it just gets harder and harder for middle-class Americans to get by. Then you throw in the use of hedonics, and the government has yet another tool to manipulate CPI altogether, right? Now, if you don't know what hedonics is basically saying that if the cost of something goes up by 10%, but actually increases the quality of your life by 20%, the real cost of that item would be negative 10%, right? So that's the math, that's hedonics. So in this world, there would be actually deflation, right? Which is absurd. That's not the way it works, because cost of money that's going out of your pocket is actually an increase still, right? Now that's an extreme example, but it shows just how subjective these calculations have become. And the reality is, the more subjective, that this is, the easier it is to manipulate. And the government wants to manipulate us and control us and make it so we don't really know what's going on, right? So what does this mean to you? I think what it means is inflation is actually going to get way worse before it gets better. I don't think they have a hold on it. I think the idea that inflation was transitory was never the case. They knew that. That's what Jerome Powell said. We need to retire that word. But it also means that you're probably going to feel it worse than the numbers are actually going to tell you, right? Like I said, they're misleading us, right? So inflation is going to say 7 or 8 or 9 or 10%, but it's going to be much worse than that. And you're going to be feeling it much more in your bank account with the amount of money that's going out with your gas and your oil and your food and all that stuff. So here's the bottom line. Regardless of where you fall on the spectrum of agreeing with how inflation is calculated or not, the fact that we have a government and the chairman of the Fed who are making direct comparisons from 2021 right now to the 1970s and the 1980s, what that does is it shows me that they're intentionally manipulating what's going on in our economy, and they're doing it at your expense and at my expense. So the question is, what do you do now if you're concerned about inflation? Well, there's a couple things that I would kind of suggest everybody do. First and foremost, eliminate all variable debt that you have, because the cost of variable debt is going to go through the roof over the next couple of years. As inflation goes up, the fixed market will go up. The cost of variable debt is going to go up. That includes credit cards, variable loans, anything of that nature. The next thing to do is load up on long-term fixed debt. Why? Because if inflation is 7% and you can purchase a mortgage at 3%, then you win in two ways, right? First, the value of your house is going to increase as inflation goes up, right? So that's the nature of inflation. Hard assets will go up. Inflation drives those prices up. So the asset's going to become more valuable just based on inflation. So you win that way. Now, secondly, your effective loan rate is actually negative, right? You're paying 3%, but if you're paying 3% and inflation is 7%, that means you have an annual 4% improvement in cash flow with that loan. Does that make sense? It's pretty awesome. So the third thing that you can do is buy and hold hard assets like gold, crypto, real estate, like I already mentioned, any kind of hard asset, because they're going to go up with inflation. Hard assets are kind of an inflation hedge, right? But the bottom line is, like, all that being said, here's the bad news about what I'm seeing. We're headed down a scary path, and inflation is getting out of control. And the reality is we don't have the ability to do anything about it, right? If you understand how Keynesian economics work, then you know that when inflation is high, the Fed is supposed to increase rates like Paul Volcker did in 1979. That's just the way it works. But the problem here is our government is in so much debt that increasing rates is going to bankrupt our country because we couldn't even afford to make the interest payments on nearly our $30 trillion in debt, right? Think about it. If we got to 5% federal funds rate, the short-term rollover on our debt, and about 70% of our debt is a short-term rollover type debt that we owe, right? That would make it so the cost to pay for our debt would be over $1 trillion, right? Like, we're not going to be able to handle that. So the sad reality is this is a fight that the Fed can't win, right? Like, they've allowed the problem to go on for too long. They've kept interest rates way too low for too long. They've been purchasing treasury notes for far too long, doing QE 1, 2, and 3, unprecedented money printing, all these different things. And the reality is we're out of ammunition. There's not much we can do. Inflation is out of control. They're not being honest about it. They're manipulating everybody to kind of play their game in a way that they want to kind of control the dynamic of the conversation. It's one of the reasons I love doing what we do and love kind of educating people about what's going on and the reality of this, because it's not just about like how bad it is. I'm a big believer in humanity. I'm a big believer we're going to figure this out. But I'm also a big believer that you don't come off of heroin after being addicted to it for a long time and not feel the pain, not go through the withdrawals. And I think we're in a bad situation right now because no politician wants to be the one who does that, right? Like Paul Volcker did this in 1979, 1980, and he was a champion for doing it. And it took somebody with guts. It took somebody bold like Reagan and Volcker to come together to do what was right. I mean, imagine where we would be right now if they didn't take rates and raise them to almost 20%. It went from 6% to nearly 20% almost overnight. Like, think about what the economy would do right now if we did that. And guess what? The economy crashed in 1982 for a bit, or in 1980 also, I should say. And then by 1982, it was roaring back, right? Then we had the booming 80s, right? And it was because of that decision. Now, does it mean we're going to get there without pain? No, we got to take our medicine on this. Like, we've been acting irresponsibly, living off the financing of the rest of the world, paying for our lifestyle here in America, and living off that for far too long, acting irresponsibly, quite frankly, being like children when it comes to how our government is managing our money. And there's no way around that. So what I would say to you is that you want to make sure that you have a financial strategy that protects you from volatility, that gives you inflation protection, right? Because you need to make sure that wherever you're saving your money has some sort of inflation hedge built into it. That's really important. You want to make sure that you have a cash flow investing strategy. You want to make sure that you're buying and investing in inflation hedged assets, not just stocks, because I think a lot of these stocks are going to struggle as times come, and the stock market is going to struggle. And the bottom line is we're going to see a lot of volatility. Now, you're either going to be like the masses, like 95% of the people who get massacred in the volatility, like 2008, or you could be one of the few that become wealthy, that take advantage of it, that know how to structure your life and prepare for this. And that's why I'm so passionate about doing this. So anyway, if you have any questions about any of this, leave them in the comment section below. If you haven't thought about this, it's really important. This is one of the most important factors. I mean, I actually read an article, retirees are more concerned about inflation right now than almost any other factor, and they're for good reason. I think people who are retiring right now lived through the 70s. They had the gas lines. They saw what was going on, and they're not stupid. They remember what happened, right? And this is just history repeating itself. The question is, are we going to have a champion to come through and do what's right to save us? Or are we going to have to like go through and implode and really go through even more pain? Because the longer we kick the can down the road, the worse the pain's going to be. The longer we kick the can up the hill, the bigger the cliff's going to be. That's just reality. Those are principles that you cannot avoid. And so leave a comment in the section below if you have any questions. I will engage with you. If you want to talk to somebody about your financial strategy in your world, in your life, systems, strategies that you can implement to kind of protect you and do all these things that I'm talking about, go down in the section below, go to the link, the Life 180 Clarity Call, set up a call with one of our people, and they'd be happy to talk to you. No sales pitch, just adding value, having a conversation, see how we can serve you. No pressure at all. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, because I got a lot of videos coming out. I'm really passionate about this. I love making this content. I'm a geek about researching this stuff, and I love to share it with you. So make sure you subscribe, hit that bell. That way, every time we launch a new video, you get notified. And we're launching a video pretty much 6 days a week right now, so it's pretty cool. Everything from financial strategies, inflation, economics, crypto, all that stuff. We've got a great team that's putting out different content all over the place. And so that's it. If you found value in this, I think this is really important for people to understand. Smash that like button, share this video, get it out to more people. And that honestly, if you found value in this, the best way you can pay me back is hit that. If you found value, hit that like button and share this with people. And that's the best way you can serve me and serve this channel. And I appreciate you. I'm honored that you took the time to get to this point in the video. And that's it. Until next video, have a blessed, inspirational day. Keep the faith. Keep going. Talk to you soon.